By April of 1959, George Romney was on top of the world. Time magazine praised the chief executive of American Motors Corporation for taking on Detroit's gas guzzlers with a little car called the Rambler.
He took a company that was absolutely bound to go out of business, and he not only turned it around, he made it so successful, he shattered sales records that had stood for decades. He really became famous.
Time even suggested he could run for public office, but the praise came with a warning. The Rambler's success had spurred GM, Ford, and Chrysler to launch compact cars of their own. One rival executive quipped, "Give the big three a year in the economy market, and Romney will be flat against the wall."
The Last Independent Automaker was sponsored in part by Visit Detroit, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, Motor City's National Heritage Area, and by the following car clubs, as well as the over 375 individuals and organizations who donated to this project. Thank you.
In 1959, I left Chrysler and went to American Motors. My first day there was, I think, September the 5th, the same day that Dick Teague became assistant to Ed Anderson, who was the head of styling at the time.
Since 1950, Edmund Anderson had been head of styling at Nash and later American Motors. His new assistant, Richard Teague, had a great talent for clever designs on a budget.
He was a fantastic artist. It was unreal. And to watch him draw, to watch the beautiful drawings that he did, and he did many, many automobiles.
Soon, AMC's small staff felt like a family.
Dick Teague says, you know, I walked by Ed Anderson and he called you the skinny kid with the large nose. That was my, that was not that flattering, but that's good, that's fine.
With new compact car competition from the Studebaker Lark, Plymouth Valiant, Ford Falcon, and Chevrolet Corvair, designers had to keep Rambler styling fresh.
When you restyle an automobile, it's a very expensive proposition, many millions of dollars. So if you decide that, okay, the car looks nice with 2 headlights on it, but I think we better put 4 headlights because that's what the public is looking for. Well, that's going to cost you money because you've got to change the fenders and you've got to change the grille. So you get this conundrum. If you don't change the car enough, it might not sell. But if you change it too much, it's going to cost you, it might cost you too much money. It's a very delicate balance.
My dad took my mom and me to American Motors to the design studio where this Rambler American was mocked up in clay. And he was very proud of it. And I said, "It's awful." And he laughed. I didn't realize he was still using the same unibody construction. He was just putting a new skin on it. He couldn't make it look like a Falcon or a Corvair or something more sleek.
The beautiful, beautiful way it turns and the way it parks and the way it saves you money on gas. The beautiful, beautiful lowest price of all.
And that's not all.
Fortunately, buyers liked the new 1961 Rambler American and Classic. And although the unusual-looking Ambassador struggled, AMC remained profitable. But young Mitt wasn't the only one who didn't see eye to eye with the boss. Anderson was annoyed with Romney's continued consulting with outside design firms. AMC's board balked at the millions he was spending to improve product quality. And when Vice President Roy Chapin Jr. suggested they buy the Jeep division of Kaiser Industries, Romney increased car production instead.
They built more cars in one plant than any other company. The Kenosha main plant became the most productive auto factory in North America.
The majority of Ramblers came from one plant in Kenosha, Wisconsin. To boost output, AMC leased an old mattress factory across town, naming it the Lakefront plant. That year, when Romney negotiated a new labor contract with United Auto Workers Union President Walter Reuther, the two surprisingly reached common ground.
Walter Reuther said to him, "You know, George, us asking for more and more money to do less and less work is a dead-end street." And my dad said, "You're right. We need to have the workers of the company committed to the success of the company." He also felt that the workers in the automobile industry ought to share in the profits.
Together, they drafted the first UAW contract with profit sharing for the workers. Rival executives seethed, calling Romney a socialist. But Rambler's market share continued to grow.
We used to get automotive news. We'd look to see how many cars had been sold by each company, and there were a number of times when Rambler was the number 3 selling car in America. But if Rambler could be up there with those big brands, that was extraordinary.
Unfortunately, the year ended on a bitter note when Anderson confronted Romney during a meeting with rival design firms.
Maybe it was just a bad day, but he blew up. And he said, "You know, George, this is ridiculous. We should not be bringing in these outside guys. I'm the head designer. Do you want me or do you want these guys?" And George Romney is not somebody that's your back up to a wall.
Tempers flared, and Romney forced Anderson to resign, replacing him with Richard Teague.
And Anderson did not think that was going to happen. It was tragic because he really did a great job there.
What nobody knew was that soon Romney would be leaving too. Outside of work, Republican leaders had encouraged the rising star to run for governor of Michigan.
A lot of individuals, though they are very comfortable in the occupation they currently have, they want to do something for the country and for the state, and he did do that.
In February of '62, he took an unpaid leave and threw his hat into the ring. While Romney campaigned, work continued on an all-new Rambler design for '63.
I know he loved the company, but I think he came to the point where he felt that the state he lived in and loved was making terrible mistakes, and he felt that he needed to try and save the state. So, always a sense of purpose and mission.
Running as a maverick Republican, he flipped the deeply blue state, and after 2 decades, left cars for politics.
The final act of resignation is naturally an emotional hurdle when you've been as intimately connected with the company and its people as I have during the past 14 years with the people in American Motors. Now, I'm very gratified that the events have clearly indicated that the company is in capable hands.
But those hands would lead in a very different direction.
The car of the year is Rambler.
Go find yourself a Rambler. Go take the wheel. The car of the year is Rambler.
When the '63-'64 Rambler Classic came out, that I was impressed with. That's really a great car.
Rambler. You've got yourself a winner. Car of the year. Beauty plus economy. Get ahead of the game. Hey, Rambler's the name. Rambler 1963.
The award-winning new Ramblers had Romney and Anderson's fingerprints all over them.
Rambler 1963.
However, the new president and CEO, Roy Abernathy, was quite different from his predecessor.
I remember vividly the first time I met him, he was chewing a cigar. I mean, he didn't smoke it, he chewed it. And every once in a while, he would disgustingly pull it out of his mouth and show us what he'd been chewing on. That was Roy Abernathy, a real old school kind of guy.
As vice president of sales, Abernathy made economical Ramblers into bestsellers. But now, buyers, especially young ones, wanted more power. That April, he approved an ad saying, "The only race Rambler cares about is the human race." In response, people joked that Ramblers were too slow to race anyways.
They were liked by older, more sensible people, which was a drawback. Younger kids, all they want is a nice car, sporty car, this, that, whatnot.
Rather than focus on economy or performance, Abernathy wanted to move upmarket with bigger cars and hopefully bigger profits.
Abernathy was a sales guy. He had a sales background, and he wanted big, flashy cars to sell because that's what the big three was selling.
Pulling aside his PR manager, he said, "Help me get rid of this Romney image."
My closest friend growing up, and still a very close friend of mine, is Edsel Ford II. His father brought home a Mustang prototype, and it was about the coolest thing I'd ever seen.
Along with the Plymouth Barracuda, the groundbreaking 1964.5 Ford Mustang instantly created a new market, aptly called pony cars.
It was a very sporty looking car at an absolutely incredible price. And American Motors had nothing like that. Well, nobody else had anything like that.
It was the most successful new car introduction in history, and it affected every other company because within 2 weeks they realized we have got to come out with a competitor for this Mustang. Ford is eating our lunch and our supper too.
AMC already had a sporty compact in development, the Rambler Tarpon, but Abernathy wanted it bigger. So it was enlarged and renamed the Marlin.
We have attempted all types of window designs of the side view of it. We finally came up with the loop, but I come back from vacation, go into the studio. We had a clay model there, and I see these wooden pegs sticking up from the back of the headroom area. And I said to Keith Goodnow, who was my clay supervisor, "What are these?" He says, I got orders that we have to raise the roof line, I think it was 1.5 inches. I says, "What?"
While inspecting the Marlin, Abernathy had bumped his head and angrily demanded they give it more room.
You've got to raise the roof line, and you know what that does to the side view of the sleekness of the roof? There are pictures of myself pointing out, my goodness gracious, you're going to have to raise the roof line that high. So Keith went in and tried to move things around so that it did the best, but you can see it's not as good.
Under Abernathy, the Ramblers were growing. 1965 brought the new Marlin, Ambassador, and Classic, all with more room and more luxury.
I think 65 and 6 was AMC's absolute highest quality interiors. There's a lot of chromed metal parts, high-end fabrics, nice fit and finish. They had really nice carpet that was comparable to what Cadillacs were using, but all that cost money.
Now, AMC had to earn that money back.
We only had one car, and at 3:10 every day, my mom and I got in the car and came to the Motors on 30th Avenue and picked up my dad. The anticipation of waiting for that horn to go off, it would just be a rush across 30th Avenue. Traffic would stop. You could see it in the tin lunchboxes swinging. You could see it in the camaraderie between people yelling about what happened during the day. It was part of the life of Kenosha. It was part of what Kenosha was.
Employing tens of thousands, the former Nash Motors factory had built America's first all-union-made car in 1934. 3 decades later, labor relations were still contentious, even when the lines were blurred.
They used to tell us, you don't affiliate with the union. That's not your job. And they chewed me out no end because I associated with these guys. They're my friends. I grew up with them. Just because I got a tie on and they don't, that don't mean I'm different than they are. But here again, when they were wondering what was going on with the union, what would they do? Call me in and say, what is the union thinking about? Are they gonna go on strike? Get us the information.
The latest grievance was with a Romney-era policy where industrial engineers, or IEs, tracked productivity.
It was very upsetting to the hourly people to have this guy come down there with a stopwatch. Every time they would add on to the, well, you got 10 seconds left here, so you can do this. And they would take this job and put it all on this job.
They knew when you were not really running as hard as you could. And industrial engineer will say, well, He's only 75% efficient. So they'd add 3 more screws onto him.
IEs were not liked.
AMC had to control costs to stay competitive, and the business was only getting tougher. In March of '66, the Studebaker Corporation ended all car production. Years of mismanagement now served as a warning to others.
There's an old saying in the automobile industry that there's no problem that can't be solved by selling more cars. If you don't have the volume, you're not going to be successful.
Unfortunately, Rambler sales had fallen 20% in 2 years and continued to fall. More and more baby boomers were flocking to the Big Three's new muscle cars.
It was all about muscle and horsepower and what could bring the babes, right? You weren't going to bring the babes in with a 1952 Nash. It just wasn't going to happen.
The GTO, Cutlass maybe, the Malibu, we couldn't afford most of them, but they were the cars that were targeted at younger single people.
My friends had Mustangs and Camaros, and I had my mom's Rambler station wagon. My friends used to call it Mrs. Romney's grocery getter, and I'm proud of the car today. I think I probably wasn't terribly proud of it back then.
To rebrand, Abernathy dropped the Rambler name from certain models, but it didn't help much. Increased sales of the glitzy new Ambassador were overshadowed by the decline of AMC's other cars.
There's a lot of competition in the market, especially then. I mean, you look at the mid-'60s, and every one of the big three had 3 or 4 or 5 brands, each with multiple models. It was a crowded market.
Even with a high-power V8, the oddly styled Marlin was a flop, selling just 4,500 copies that year, compared to the over 500,000 Mustangs sold by Ford. By now, AMC had a true pony car in development, but it wouldn't be ready until 1968. To build excitement, AMC showed off a concept car called the American Motors Experimental. Styled by Chuck Mashigan, the wild AMX was unlikely to reach mass production.
A concept car is a vision of what a future car could be or might be. They're generally not running automobiles. They're just mock-ups.
But as Abernathy burned through capital, AMC's board was losing confidence.
Roy Abernathy was a good sales executive, but he was not inspiring, and he didn't have that touch.
In June of '66, investor Robert Evans became chairman, and the two immediately clashed. Thankfully, the new sporty car, now called Javelin, was finally taking shape. Overseen by designer Bob Nixon, it shared many cues with the high-performance AMX. Convinced that Javelin wasn't enough to remake AMC's image, Evans wanted to build both cars, but management hesitated. In a stroke of money-saving genius, Teague's team adapted the AMX to a shortened Javelin body, creating a 4-seat pony car and a 2-seat performance car off the same platform.
The beauty of it is that you were able to come out with 2 different vehicles at 2 very different price levels, aimed at 2 or 3 entirely different markets, using basically one set of tools.
Having learned his lesson, Abernathy didn't meddle with the styling.
The Now Cars from the 1967 American Motors. The Now Cars are built for today's driving, today's driver, from the company on top of today.
Meanwhile, American Motors launched bigger, bolder cars for 1967. Overseen by Teague and styled by Geraci, the cars were gorgeous, but sales were disappointing.
As far as the aesthetics go, they're clean, they're neat, they're contemporary. If those were, in truth, Chevrolets or Fords, they would have sold by the carload.
The aging Rambler American was now AMC's only compact car, and it faced increased competition from foreign imports. Abernathy's expensive gamble to move up market wasn't paying off.
And they weren't connecting with the old customer. They weren't connecting with baby boomers who could have been new customers all around. The market wasn't there for the cars that Abernathy was trying to sell.
As a result, American Motors had its first yearly loss in a decade. In January of '67, Robert Evans convinced the board to force Roy Abernathy into early retirement. And the Marlin soon followed. To right the sinking ship, the board appointed William Leuneberg president and Roy Chapin Jr. chairman and CEO. The upcoming Javelin and AMX became top priority.
He knew that it would have a huge impact on the image of American Motors.
Marketing VP Bill McNeely suggested AMC hire Wells Rich Green, a groundbreaking ad agency, and the first major firm run by a woman, Mary Wells.
She really invented being a hard ass for women because, first of all, there weren't any women around, and second of all, a woman who was just a typical woman and wasn't a hard ass would never have made it.
Wells wanted to pit each American Motors car against its best-known competitor. But in conservative Detroit, this was heresy.
You know, they like to consider themselves all gentlemen, and gentlemen don't talk down a competitor's product. That was the unwritten rule.
Wells told Chapin that American Motors was too desperate to play nice, and he reluctantly gave in. When the 1968 American Motors Javelin debuted in the fall of '67, it took direct aim at the Mustang.
One of the print campaigns was a 2-page spread called An Unfair Comparison. This Javelin has this, and the Mustang does not, and let you draw your own comparison.
An unfair comparison between the Mustang and the Javelin, between the Fairlane and the Rebel, between the VW and the Rambler American. Javelin has a richer, more polished look and more horsepower in its standard 6-cylinder engine. The American gives you a bigger battery, bigger brakes, and bigger fuel tank than the Volkswagen. The Rebel gives you more headroom up front, more legroom, shoulder room, and hip room.
I mean, some of the comparisons were ridiculous, but it delivered the point that our car had more value.
Our Javelin is endowed with yards of costly glass. Unfair because Mustang isn't nearly so generous. The American outweighs the VW by 800 pounds. The Rebel offers you individually adjustable reclining seats. The Fairlane doesn't. And unfairest of all, our Javelin lists for no more than the Mustang.
And Henry Ford was livid, but Roy D. Chapin was his best friend. So he took it out on the advertising company.
Furious at Mary Wells, Ford's wife threatened to not attend a dinner party if that woman would be there. But a decade later, when Ford wanted to reinvigorate his company's image, he would hire Wells Rich Green.
Hey, you want a drag? Huh?
Along with AMC's print ads came clever new TV commercials.
I got a bowl of goldfish on the seat.
We at American Motors never had the reputation for building hot, sporty cars. Then we built the Javelin.
Hello, mon ami. You wish to race with me?
No. Merci.
It can go from 0 to 60 in 7.86 seconds. Now we have the reputation for building hot, sporty cars.
I convinced my dad that I needed to go work at Wells Rich Green one summer, and it was phenomenal.
It could make you think twice about buying an import.
So even if you can't use air conditioning, you're still getting something.
They were always funny because that makes them memorable. But even if it was funny, there was still a sales pitch in there. And the AMC dealers loved it.
The excitement continued in March of '68 with the AMX, and American Motors found itself doing something it hadn't done since the Hudson Hornet: racing.
Look out! I'm coming through!
drivers Craig and Lee Breedlove set 106 speed and endurance records in 2 AMXs. And other AMC cars were now showing up on racetracks around the country.
The old slogan, win on Sunday, sell on Monday. Motorsports were exploding. They were starting to get regular television coverage. Customers were glued to it.
The Javelin sold 55,000 copies in its first year, more than the Marlin had in 3.
It changed the image. All of a sudden, youth was showing up in American Motor showrooms.
American Motors was changing. The Kelvinator appliance division was sold for extra cash. And AMC gave a hot pink AMX to Playboy magazine's Playmate of the Year, something George Romney would have never done. But the governor was now running for president, and his influence at American Motors had all but disappeared. 1969 would be the last year for the last Rambler model. To send it out in style, American Motors and Hearst Performance built a limited run of high-power drag cars. With AMC's biggest engine crammed into its smallest car, the tiny Terror was a far cry from the frugal Ramblers of old. But American Motors needed more than fast cars to be profitable. The rest of the market was as competitive as ever. And now that Roy Chapin was in charge, he had ambitions of his own.
Thank you for watching episode 2 of The Last Independent Automaker. Be sure to join us next time for episode 3 when we talk about a little car called the Gremlin. And speaking of gremlins, that's just one of several vehicles in the complete book of AMC cars. With 240 pages of facts, figures, and color photographs, the complete book of AMC cars makes the perfect companion to our documentary. You can order a copy from the link in this video's description, or just visit our website. Again, we'd like to thank all the sponsors who made this documentary possible. Visit Detroit connects curious travelers with the region's iconic heritage and culture, including its notable art, food, festival, music, and museum experiences, and of course, the auto industry. Learn more about what the Detroit metro area has in store for you at visitdetroit.com. The Alfred P. Sloan Foundation aims to increase public understanding and engagement with science. Motor City's National Heritage Area preserves, interprets, and promotes the automotive and labor heritage of the Detroit region. And of course, thanks to all the car clubs around the country who supported our work, as well as the over 375 individuals and organizations who donated to our documentary. If you enjoyed this program and would still like to support us, you can still make a donation. Just leave us a tip on our website. And lastly, I'd like to thank all the people who donated their time, talent, expertise, and even their cars to be a part of the Last Independent Automaker. And of course, thank you very much for watching.